Kim Mirai stared at the small display screen in her worn-out ship. The numbers glowed back at her like an enemy. 1 credit. That was all she had left in the entire galaxy. Her fingers pressed against the cold metal wall of her tiny cabin. The ship groaned around her as it drifted through space near New Sol Station. 3 days ago, her hyperdrive had exploded in a shower of sparks and smoke. Now her ancient vessel could barely move faster than a walking pace. Mirai pushed her black hair away from her tired eyes. She had been a salvage pilot for 8 years. Finding old wrecks and selling useful parts to traders was hard work, but it kept her fed. Until now. The repair shop on New Sol Station had laughed at her when she asked about fixing her hyperdrive. 10,000 credits minimum, they said. For a ship like hers, maybe 15,000. They looked at her patched clothes and dirty boots and shook their heads. "Lady, you better find a new job," one mechanic had told her. "That old bucket is not worth fixing." But Mirai needed her ship. Without it, she had no way to make money. Without money, she could not eat. Without food, she would die. It was that simple. She grabbed her worn jacket and headed for the station's docking bay. New Sol Station was not like the clean, bright stations near Earth. This place sat on the edge of human space, where the Galactic Council barely cared what happened. The walls were dirty, the air smelled bad, and half the lights did not work. Perfect for desperate people like her. The main corridor buzzed with aliens of every shape and size. Tall, thin Vorthak traders whispered deals in dark corners. Short, round belly merchants sold food from steaming carts. Flying Zephyrin scouts darted overhead, their wings making soft whooshing sounds. Most of them ignored Mirai completely. Humans were common here, and poor humans were beneath notice. She walked deeper into the station, past the legal shops and into the black market district. Here the lights were even dimmer and the smells were worse. This was where people sold things the Galactic Council did not want sold. Mirai had been here before buying cheap parts for her ship. She knew which dealers were honest and which would rob her blind. But today was different. Today she was not shopping for ship parts. She was looking for a miracle. The first few stalls had nothing she could afford. Weapons cost hundreds of credits. Rare metals cost thousands. Even basic food was more than her 1 credit could buy. Then she saw it. At the far end of the market, tucked between 2 empty stalls, was a tiny shop she had never noticed before. The sign above it was written in Vorthak symbols that glowed faintly blue. A tall, thin alien with gray skin and 4 arms stood behind a counter covered in strange objects. Mirai walked closer. The alien looked up at her with large, dark eyes. "Welcome, human," he said in perfect Earth standard. His voice sounded like wind through metal pipes. "I am Quelon. You look like someone in need of something special." "I need a lot of things," Mirai said, "but I only have 1 credit." Most dealers would have laughed at her. Quelon just nodded as if 1 credit was a perfectly normal amount to spend. "Ah," he said, "sometimes the most valuable purchases cost very little. Come look at what I have." The counter was full of items Mirai did not recognize. Glowing crystals the size of her thumb, metal devices covered in buttons and strange symbols, small containers that seemed to hold swirling mist. "What do you sell here?" she asked. "Rare biological samples," Quelon said. "Genetic material from extinct species. Most of my customers are scientists and collectors." He gestured to a display case behind him. Inside were dozens of small objects, each with a price tag. The cheapest one Mirai could see cost 50,000 credits. Her heart sank. Even in the black market, she could not afford anything useful. "However," Quelon continued, "I am having a special auction today. Items that have not sold in my regular inventory." He pulled out a small tablet and tapped it with one of his 4 fingers. A list appeared on the screen. "Let me see," he muttered. "Ah, yes, here we are. Lot number 47. Unviable genetic material from the Dracorian extinction. Starting bid 1 credit." Mirai blinked. "1 credit? What is it?" Quelon reached under his counter and pulled out a small dark object about the size of her fist. It looked like a rock, but its surface was too smooth. Strange patterns covered it like cracks in ice. "This is what remains of a Dracorian egg," he explained. "The Dracorians died out 3,000 years ago. Very little is known about them. This egg was found floating in space, completely dead. No genetic activity at all." "What were Dracorians?" Mirai asked. Quelon shrugged with all 4 shoulders. "No one knows for sure. The Galactic Council records say they were a minor species that went extinct due to natural causes, but the few artifacts we find suggest they were quite advanced. He set the egg-shaped object on the counter in front of her. It was dark gray, almost black, with silver veins running through it like frozen lightning. "Of course, this one is completely dead," Quillon said again. "No collector wants dead genetic material. I have been trying to sell it for 2 years." Mirai picked up the egg. It was heavier than it looked and surprisingly warm. The moment her fingers touched it, she felt a tiny tingle like static electricity. "Why is it warm?" she asked. "Probably residual energy from whatever process preserved it," Quillon said. "Nothing to worry about." Other customers had gathered around the auction area. Most of them were wealthy-looking aliens with expensive clothes and jewelry. They bid on items that cost more credits than Mirai had ever seen in her life. When Lot 47 came up, Quillon held up the dark egg. "Unviable Dracorian genetic material," he announced. "Starting bid, 1 credit." The crowd was silent. A few aliens laughed. "1 credit for a dead rock?" Someone called out. "Who would waste money on that?" Mirai raised her hand. "I bid 1 credit." More laughter echoed through the small space. A well-dressed belly merchant shook his round head. "Humans," he said to his companion. "They will buy anything." "Going once," Quillon called. Going twice, no one else bid. Why would they? It was just a dead piece of rock from an extinct species that no one remembered. "Sold to the human lady for 1 credit, Quillon announced. Mirai handed over her last credit, the final piece of currency she owned in the entire galaxy. In return, she received a small bag containing the dark egg. As she turned to leave, Quillon spoke quietly to her. "Interesting choice," he said. "That particular item has been in my family's collection for over a century. My grandfather always said it was special, but he could never explain why." "What do you mean?" Mirai asked. "Probably nothing," Quillon said. "Just an old trader's intuition. But if I were you, I would keep it somewhere warm and safe." Mirai nodded and walked away, clutching the small bag. She had spent her last credit on what everyone else thought was worthless junk. Her ship was still broken, she still had no money, and she was still stranded on this terrible station. But as she walked back through the market, the egg seemed to grow warmer in the bag. And deep inside her chest, for the first time in days, she felt something that might have been hope. She did not know it yet, but her single credit had just purchased something that would change not only her life, but the fate of every world in the galaxy. The egg was not dead at all. It was only sleeping, and it was beginning to wake up. 3 days had passed since Mirai bought the strange egg. Her ship drifted slowly through space, moving on emergency thrusters that barely pushed them forward. At this speed, it would take weeks to reach the nearest human colony. The egg sat on her small table, still warm to the touch. Mirai found herself looking at it more and more often. Sometimes she thought she saw the silver lines on its surface glow a little brighter, but she told herself it was just her imagination. Her food supplies were getting low. The ship's water recycler made strange noises every few hours. The air felt stale and heavy. Without her hyperdrive, she was trapped in a slow journey to nowhere. On the 3rd night, Mirai was trying to sleep in her narrow bunk when she heard a sound. It was soft, like glass breaking very slowly. She sat up and looked around her tiny cabin. The sound came again. She turned on the cabin lights and gasped. The egg was moving. Tiny cracks had appeared across its surface, and they were spreading like spider webs. The silver lines were glowing brighter now, pulsing like a heartbeat. Mirai grabbed the egg and held it carefully in her hands. It was much warmer than before, almost hot. The cracks widened, and she saw something inside. A piece of the shell fell away. Then another. Something small and wet pushed through the opening. It was alive. The creature that emerged from the egg was no bigger than her hand. It had 4 legs, 2 small wings, and a long tail. Its skin was covered in tiny scales that shifted color from silver to deep blue as Mirai watched. 2 large eyes opened and looked directly at her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the little creature made a soft chirping sound and crawled closer to her palm. "Hello there," Mirai whispered. "You are not dead after all." The creature tilted its head at the sound of her voice. It looked like a tiny dragon from old Earth stories, but more beautiful than any picture she had ever seen. Its scales caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. When Mirai gently touched the creature with 1 finger, something amazing happened. Images flashed through her mind. Not words, but feelings and pictures. She saw vast cities made of crystal and light. She saw great ships flying between the stars. She saw beings like this little creature, but much larger, working together with other species to build wonderful things. The images faded. leaving Mirai breathless. "What are you?" she asked. The creature looked up at her and made another soft sound. This time Mirai felt its answer rather than heard it. The feeling came with images of stars and the word Buell appearing in her mind. "Buell," she repeated. "Is that your name?" The creature Buell nodded its small head and curled up in her palm. Within minutes it was fast asleep. Mirai sat in her chair for a long time watching the tiny dragon breathe. Her mind raced with questions. How was this possible? The egg had been completely dead according to Kelon. The Dracorians had been extinct for thousands of years, yet here was proof that at least one had survived. Over the next day, amazing things began to happen to her ship. The water recycler that had been making noise suddenly ran perfectly. The air began to smell fresh and clean. Her food supplies, which should have run out, seemed to last longer than they should. Most surprising of all, her navigation computer began showing her things it had never displayed before. New star charts appeared on the screen, more detailed and accurate than anything in the ship's database. Trade routes she had never heard of were marked in glowing lines. Buell grew quickly. By the second day after hatching, he was the size of a cat. His scales had settled into a pattern of deep blue with silver edges. He could walk around the cabin easily now, and his wings were strong enough to carry him short distances. More importantly, their connection was getting stronger. Mirai found she could understand Buell's thoughts and feelings more clearly. He could understand her words and respond with images and emotions that appeared in her mind. Through their link, Buell showed her fragments of memory. Not his own memories, but older ones that seemed to be stored in his genetic code. Mirai saw the Dracorians as they had once been, magnificent beings who lived in harmony with their technology. They did not build machines the way other species did. Instead, they grew their tools and ships and cities like living things. The Dracorians had partners from many different species. These partnerships were sacred bonds that allowed both beings to do incredible things together. They could heal the sick, purify poisoned worlds, and even reshape matter at the atomic level. But something terrible had happened to them. In the memory fragments, Mirai saw war. She saw Dracorian cities burning and great ships falling from the sky. She saw the last of the Dracorians hiding their eggs in secret places throughout the galaxy, hoping their children would survive even if they did not. The Council, Buell communicated to her through images and feelings. They were afraid. On the third day, Buell was the size of a large dog. He could speak now, not with his voice but directly into Mirai's mind. His thoughts came to her as clearly as if he were speaking aloud. "They killed my people because we could change things," he told her. "The Council wanted to keep the galaxy the way it was. We offered to share our gifts, but they saw us as a threat." Mirai felt sick. "The official records say your species died from natural causes." "Lies," Buell replied. "They hunted us across the stars. They destroyed our worlds and scattered our eggs to make sure we could never return." As if responding to their conversation, Mirai's communication system suddenly activated. A message was coming through on official Galactic Council channels. "All ships and stations," the message began. "Be alert for unauthorized biohazardous materials recently stolen from New Sol Station. Any vessel carrying Dracorian genetic samples must report immediately for inspection. This is a matter of galactic security." Mirai turned off the communication system and looked at Buell. He had grown still, his scales darkening with emotion. "They know you are alive," she said. "Yes," Buell agreed. "I can feel others of my kind awakening across the galaxy. The Council will try to find us all and destroy us before we can grow strong." Through their bond, Mirai felt Buell's fear, but also his determination. She also felt something else, his complete trust in her. "What do we do?" she asked. Buell looked at her with his large, intelligent eyes. "We survive. We find the others. We finish what my people started thousands of years ago." "Which is what?" "We free the galaxy from those who would keep it in chains." That night, as her ship continued its slow journey through space, Mirai made a decision. She could try to hide Buell and hope the Council never found them, or she could help him find the other surviving Dracorians and fight for the future his people had dreamed of. She looked at Buell, who was now large enough to curl around her shoulders like a living necklace. His scales were warm against her skin, and their mental connection filled her with strength she had never felt before. One credit had bought her a dragon, but it had also bought her a cause worth fighting for, and a bond that was already changing both of their lives in ways she was only beginning to understand. The ship's navigation system chimed softly. A new course had appeared on the screen, leading to coordinates Mirai had never seen before. Somehow she knew Buell was guiding them toward other awakening eggs, other survivors who would need their help. The real adventure was just beginning. 2 weeks had passed since Buell hatched. The dragon was now as large as Mirai herself, his wingspan stretching across the entire width of her small cabin. His scales had deepened to a rich blue that seemed to hold starlight within each one. When he spoke to her mind, his voice was clear and strong. Their ship had been following the mysterious coordinates that appeared on the navigation system. Today, they finally reached their destination. There, Buell said, his thoughts touching Mirai's mind as he looked out the viewport. My home. The star system ahead looked empty at first glance. Just a yellow star with several dead planets orbiting around it. But as they drew closer, Mirai's instruments began picking up strange readings. The third planet from the star was covered in what looked like brown dust and broken rocks. But deep underground, her scanners detected vast structures made of materials her computer could not identify. What happened here? Mirai asked. Buell's mental voice was filled with sadness. This was Draconis Prime. 3,000 years ago, it was a world of crystal cities and floating gardens. My people lived here in peace with a dozen other species. Images flowed from Buell's mind into hers. Mirai saw the planet as it once was, covered in magnificent cities that sparkled like jewels. Great towers reached toward the sky, connected by bridges of living light. Gardens floated in the air, supported by technology that looked more like magic. The Council fleet came without warning, Buell continued. They said we were a threat to galactic stability. They said our technology was too dangerous to exist. More images came. This time they were terrible. Ships dropping fire from the sky, cities crumbling into dust, people running and screaming as everything they had built was destroyed. We did not fight back at first, Buell explained. We hoped they would see reason. We offered to share our knowledge, to help make the galaxy a better place, but they were too afraid of change. Mirai guided their ship into orbit around the dead planet. Her instruments showed that the underground structures were huge, spreading across entire continents. Is it safe to go down there? She asked. For us, yes, Buell replied. The ruins will recognize me. They have been waiting for one of my kind to return. They landed near what had once been the planet's capital city. The surface was nothing but broken rocks and twisted metal under a gray sky. But as soon as Buell stepped out of the ship, something amazing happened. The ground beneath their feet began to glow with soft blue light. The light spread outward in patterns following hidden paths through the rubble. Ancient doorways that had been buried for centuries opened with the sound of distant music. Welcome home, Buell whispered. They descended into the ruins through passages that lit up as they walked. The deeper they went, the more incredible it became. Despite the destruction above, much of the underground city had survived. Vast halls stretched away into darkness. Walls covered in beautiful carvings told stories in pictures that moved when Mirai looked at them. At the center of the ruins was a great library. Thousands of crystal tablets lined the walls, each one glowing with stored information. When Buell touched one of them, it began to project images into the air. The archive of memory, Buell explained. Everything my people knew is stored here. As they moved through the library, Buell began to change. He grew larger, his scales brighter. Knowledge flowed into him from the crystal tablets, and with it came power. Soon he was twice his previous size, and when he spoke aloud now, his voice was deep and musical. I understand now, he said, his real voice echoing through the chamber. I know what we are and what we can do. Through their mental link, Buell shared what he was learning. The Dracorians were not just another species. They were shapers of reality itself. Each Dracorian could bond with another being, creating a partnership that could manipulate matter and energy on a massive scale. Together, bonded pairs could heal dying worlds, Buell explained. They could create new life where none existed. They could even reshape stars if needed. Why would the Council fear that? Mirai asked. It sounds wonderful, Buell's expression darkened. Because it would make their system of control impossible. The Council keeps peace by controlling resources. They decide who gets food, who gets technology, who gets to live well, and who must struggle. Our abilities would have made all beings free and equal. More memories played out in the crystal projections. Mirai saw Dracorians working with partners from many species. Humans, Vorthak, Belly, and dozens of others she did not recognize. Together they had built paradise worlds and healed planets damaged by war or disaster. The Council could not allow it, Bayul continued, so they created lies. They said we were conquerors who wanted to rule the galaxy. They said our technology was unstable and dangerous. Then they convinced the other species to help them hunt us down. But some of you escaped, Mirai said. My ancestors hid eggs throughout the galaxy before they died. They programmed them to remain dormant until the right conditions were met. Until they found partners worthy of the bond. Bayul looked at her with eyes that now glowed with inner light. You were not random, Mirai. The egg chose you from the moment you touched it. It sensed in you the qualities needed for a true partnership. Before Mirai could respond, an alarm echoed through the ruins. Ancient warning systems were activating all around them. Someone is coming, Bayul said, his head turning toward the surface. Multiple ships. Council forces. They ran back through the passages toward their ship. Behind them, the crystal tablets were going dark one by one as the library protected itself from discovery. As they reached the surface, Mirai saw ships descending from orbit. Sleek council vessels surrounded their landing site. The largest ship bore the markings of the Enforcement Division. Kim Mirai, a voice boomed from the ship's speakers. You are harboring a Class 1 biohazard. Surrender immediately and you will not be harmed. They are lying, Bayul said, his scales darkening with anger. They have no intention of letting us live. A familiar ship landed nearby and Mirai's heart lifted slightly. It was Park Jinho, her old friend and fellow salvage pilot. She had sent him a message before landing, asking for help if things went wrong. Jinho climbed out of his ship with his hands raised. Mirai, he called. I got your message. I brought help. But as more people emerged from his ship, Mirai realized something was wrong. They were wearing council uniforms. Jinho was not there to rescue her. He had brought the council right to them. I am sorry, Jinho called across the distance. They offered me more money than I have ever seen. Enough to buy a new ship and retire. The betrayal hit Mirai like a physical blow. Jinho had been her friend for years. They had worked together, shared meals together, trusted each other with their lives. Humans. Beale growled, his mental voice filled with disappointment. No, Mirai said firmly. Not all humans. Just him. Council soldiers were surrounding their position now, weapons raised. In the lead was a tall alien with gray skin and cold yellow eyes. His uniform marked him as a high-ranking officer. Director Vextar, the alien announced himself. Galactic Council Security Division. The creature with you is an abomination that should have died with its species. Step away from it now. Mirai moved closer to Beole instead. The dragon had grown to nearly twice her height, his presence both beautiful and terrible. Power radiated from him like heat from a fire. We do not want to fight, Mirai called out. We just want to be left alone. That is not possible, Vextar replied. The Dracorian threat was eliminated once. We will not allow it to return. The soldiers raised their weapons. Mirai could see they carried strange guns that glowed with the same energy as the ancient council weapons in the memory crystals. Dracorian killers, Bayul said quietly. They still have them. Through their bond, Mirai felt Buell gathering power. The air around them began to shimmer. The ground beneath their feet trembled. Hold on to me, Bayul commanded. Mirai wrapped her arms around the dragon's neck. The world exploded into light and sound as Buell unleashed power that had been sleeping in the ruins for 3,000 years. When the light faded, they were no longer on the planet's surface. They were flying through space, Bayul's wings carrying them both away from the world below. Behind them, the dead planet shook as buried machines came to life for the first time in millennia. Ancient defenses activated, sending council ships fleeing back to the safety of orbit. Where are we going? Mirai asked, holding tight as they soared between the stars. To find the others, Bayul replied. My awakening has triggered a signal across the galaxy. Other eggs are hatching now. Other bonds are forming. The council wanted to prevent our return, but they are already too late. As they flew toward the edge of the star system, Mirai looked back at the planet that had been Buell's home. For a brief moment she could see it as it had once been. Beautiful, peaceful, full of life. Someday, she promised herself, they would build something like that again. But first they had to survive the war that was about to begin. Director Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the empty space where the human and her dragon had disappeared. His yellow eyes burned with cold anger. 3,000 years ago, his ancestors had wiped out the Dracorian threat. Now it had returned, and he had let it escape. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we are receiving priority messages from Council worlds across 17 sectors. They are reporting unusual energy signatures and unexplained phenomena." Vextar turned from the viewport. "Dracorian eggs," he said quietly. "They are waking up." On the other side of the galaxy, Mirai and Bayul landed on a small moon to rest and plan their next move. Bayul was exhausted from carrying them both through space. His scales had dulled, and he breathed heavily as he folded his great wings. "How many others are there?" Mirai asked. Bayul closed his eyes and reached out with his mind. "I can feel them," he said. 7 others have awakened so far. More will follow." Through their mental link, Mirai saw glimpses of the newly hatched dragons. One was bonded with a young Vorthak engineer on a mining station. Another had chosen an elderly Belly grandmother who ran a small farm. A third was with a human child who had found the egg in her family's garden. "They are all in danger," Bayul said. "The Council will hunt them down one by one." As if his words had summoned them, Council ships began appearing at the edge of the star system. Dozens of them, all bearing the markings of Vextar's enforcement fleet. "How did they find us so fast?" Mirai wondered. "My power leaves traces," Bayul explained. "Every time I use my abilities, they can track the energy signature." They climbed back into Mirai's ship and prepared to run again. But as they lifted off from the moon's surface, more Council ships appeared ahead of them. They were surrounded. "This is Director Vextar," came the familiar voice over the radio. "You cannot escape forever, human. Surrender now and I promise your death will be quick." "I have a better idea," Mirai said, switching to a different frequency. "Emergency broadcast to all ships in this sector. The Galactic Council is hunting innocent civilians. They are trying to cover up a genocide they committed 3,000 years ago." She told the whole story over the open channel, how the Council had destroyed the Dracorians not because they were evil, but because their technology threatened Council control. How they had lied about the reasons for the war. How they were now trying to kill the last survivors of a peaceful species. Some of the smaller ships in the area began to withdraw. Independent traders and civilian vessels wanted no part in what was clearly becoming a major conflict. But Vextar's fleet closed in anyway. "Prepare for battle," Bayul said, his voice grim. The first exchange of weapons fire lit up the darkness of space. Council ships fired their advanced energy weapons while Mirai tried to dodge between asteroids. Her old salvage ship was not built for combat, but Bayul's presence was changing that. As the dragon focused his power through their bond, Mirai felt the ship respond in ways it never had before. The engines ran smoother and faster. The shields held against attacks that should have destroyed them. The navigation system showed her paths through the asteroid field that should have been impossible. "We cannot keep running forever," Mirai said as another blast shook their ship. "Then we do not run," Bayul replied. The dragon's scales began to glow with inner light. Power flowed through their mental connection, and Mirai suddenly understood what he wanted to do. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Trust me," Bayul said. Mirai turned their ship directly toward the largest Council vessel. Vextar's flagship loomed ahead of them like a moving mountain bristling with weapons. "What are they doing?" she heard someone ask over the radio. At the last moment, Bayul released his power, not as a weapon, but as something far more dangerous to the Council. He reached out with his mind and touched every electronic system on every ship in the area. For 30 seconds, the truth played on every screen, every display, every communication device in the fleet. Images from the crystal archives on Draconis Prime. The real history of the Dracorian War. Pictures of peaceful cities being burned. Records of Council leaders planning the genocide in secret meetings. The Council soldiers saw their own organization's lies exposed. They learned that their leaders had destroyed an entire civilization not for protection, but for power. When the transmission ended, chaos erupted in the Council fleet. Some ships turned their weapons on others. Captains who had believed they were serving justice realized they had been serving tyrants. The neat formation fell apart as individual commanders made their own choices. In the confusion, Mirai and Bayul escaped. They jumped to hyperspace and headed for the outer rim, where human colonies struggled under Council taxation and control. If they were going to fight back, they would need allies. Their first stop was Titan's Rest, a mining colony where humans dug rare metals from asteroid belts. The colony administrator was a man named Lee Suho, someone Mirai had heard was fair and honest. They landed at the colony's small spaceport just as the evening shift was ending. Hundreds of tired miners walked home to their simple houses under the dome that protected the settlement from the vacuum of space. Lee Suho met them at the landing pad. He was a middle-aged human with kind eyes and calloused hands that showed he had once been a miner himself. "I heard your broadcast," he said without introduction. "Is it true? Did the Council really destroy an entire species?" "Yes," Mirai said simply. Suho looked at Buell, who had made himself smaller to fit through the colony's corridors. "And this is one of the survivors?" "The last of his kind," Mirai confirmed. Until now. They talked long into the night in Suho's office. The administrator explained how the Council controlled human colonies through unfair trade agreements and impossible taxes. "They take 90% of what we mine," Suho said. "They say it pays for protection and infrastructure, but we see none of that protection when pirates attack, and our infrastructure falls apart while they grow richer." "What if it could be different?" Buell asked, speaking aloud so Suho could hear him. "How?" Through their mental link, Buell showed Mirai what he wanted to do. She nodded and placed her hand on his neck. Together, they reached out with their combined power to touch the colony's failing life support system. Ancient machinery that had been breaking down for years suddenly ran like new. Water purifiers that produced bitter, recycled liquid began creating water so pure and fresh, it tasted like mountain springs. Most amazing of all, the mining equipment responded to their touch. Drills that had been slow and inefficient began working with perfect precision. Ore processors that wasted half their material suddenly extracted every valuable particle. "In one day," Suho whispered, "you have increased our efficiency by 300%. This is what the Dracorians offered the galaxy," Biol explained. "Not conquest, but abundance. Not war, but prosperity for all." Over the following days, word spread through the human colonies. The Dragon Girl and her companion were helping anyone who asked. They healed sick children, repaired broken machines, and even helped barren worlds grow crops again. But their acts of kindness were also acts of rebellion. Every world they helped became less dependent on Council control. Every success proved that the current system was not necessary. Director Vextar responded with increasing violence. He declared martial law in 3 sectors. He sent battle fleets to blockade human colonies. He branded Mirai and Buell as terrorists and offered enormous rewards for their capture. The conflict was escalating beyond what anyone had expected. What had started as one human buying a strange egg was becoming a war for the future of the galaxy. On their final night at Titan's Rest, Mirai stood with Suho on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Suho asked. "Once you leave here, there will be no going back. The Council will never stop hunting you." Mirai thought about her old life as a salvage pilot. It had been simple and safe, even if it was often lonely and poor. Then she felt Buell's presence in her mind, and through him, she sensed the other awakening dragons across the galaxy, young beings taking their first breaths, looking around at a universe that wanted to kill them for existing. "Some things are worth fighting for," she said. The next morning, they left Titan's Rest and headed deeper into the frontier. Behind them, Council enforcement fleets were gathering for a massive assault. Ahead of them lay the unknown, but also the hope of finding more survivors and building something better than what came before. The hunt had begun in earnest. But Mirai and Buell were no longer running. They were fighting back one world at a time. Word of the Dragon Girl spread through the human colonies like fire in dry grass. In cantinas and mining stations, on freight ships and farming worlds, people whispered about the woman who had bought a dead egg for 1 credit and awakened something that could change everything. Cho Haiwan heard the stories while sitting in a hidden base on the moon of Kepler 442. She was the leader of Free Humanity, a group that worked to free human colonies from Council control. For 20 years she had fought with words and careful plans. Now she wondered if the time for careful plans was over. "Bring her to me," she told her agents. "I want to meet this Dragon Girl." 3 weeks later, Mirai and Buell arrived at the hidden base. The moon was cold and airless, but deep underground, the rebels had built a warm community of tunnels and chambers. Children played in the corridors while adults worked to prepare supplies for colonies that needed help. Hiwan was a small woman with gray hair and bright, determined eyes. She had been fighting the council longer than anyone Mirai had ever met. "So you are the one causing all this trouble," Hewan said with a smile. "I just wanted to fix my ship," Mirai replied. They sat together in Hewan's office, drinking tea while Buell curled around Mirai's chair. The dragon was now magnificent, his scales shining like polished metal and his eyes glowing with inner wisdom. "Tell me about your dragon," Hewan said. Through Buell, Mirai shared the story of the Dracorians, how they had lived in peace with many species, how they had used their reality-shaping powers to heal worlds and create abundance, how the council had destroyed them out of fear. "And now they are waking up again," Hewan said thoughtfully. 7 more have hatched in the past month, Buell confirmed. "They are spread across the galaxy learning to use their abilities." "Where are they?" Hewan asked. Buell closed his eyes and reached out with his mind. Through their mental link, Mirai felt him touching other consciousness across vast distances. "There is Yuki on the water world of Aquatica," he said. "She bonded with a human marine biologist named Dr. Kenji. Together they are healing the poisoned oceans that the Council's mining operations destroyed." More images flowed through the connection. On Verdania, a dragon named Nova chose an elderly human farmer named Elena. They are making the desert bloom with crops that can feed millions. A young dragon called Storm bonded with a Vorthak mechanic on the industrial world of Forge Prime. They are teaching workers how to build machines that create no pollution and waste no resources. Each story was the same: dragons choosing partners from different species, then using their combined abilities to solve problems that had seemed impossible, healing sick worlds, creating abundance where there had been scarcity, building bridges between species that had been enemies for centuries. "It is beautiful," Hewan said softly, "but it is also dangerous. The Council will never allow this to continue." As if her words had summoned them, alarms began sounding throughout the base. On the communication screens, emergency messages flashed from human colonies across 3 sectors. "Council battle fleets," one report said. "They are attacking any world that has been helped by the dragons." "Titan's rest is under siege," came another message. "They are demanding we surrender anyone who has had contact with the dragon girl." The worst news came from Aquatica. "The Council dropped poison into our oceans. They said it was to prevent biocontamination, but it is killing everything. Dr. Kenji and her dragon Yuki tried to stop the poison, but there is too much of it." Miri felt sick. "They are punishing innocent people because of us." "This is what tyrants do," Hewan said grimly. "When they cannot destroy their enemies, they hurt anyone who might support them." More reports came in throughout the night. Council forces were blockading human colonies and demanding impossible tributes. Anyone caught speaking favorably about the dragons was arrested. Entire families were being shipped off to prison worlds. But something unexpected was happening too. As Director Vextar's forces became more brutal, other species began to take notice. "The Belly Confederation has issued a formal protest," one of Hewan's agents reported. "They are calling the Council's actions against human civilians a violation of galactic law. 3 Vorthak trade unions have gone on strike," came another report. "They refuse to transport Council military supplies. Even some Council member species are beginning to ask questions," said a third agent. "The Zephrins are demanding an investigation into the Dracorian war records." Buell lifted his great head. "Something is awakening," he said. "Not just my people. The galaxy itself is beginning to remember what we offered before." Through their bond, Mirai felt Buell reaching out across space with his mind. But this time he was not just touching other dragons. He was connecting with something much larger. "The infrastructure," he whispered in wonder. Images flooded through their mental link. Mirai saw the galaxy as Buell was seeing it now. The hyperspace lanes that ships used for fast travel were not natural formations. They had been created by ancient Dracorian technology. The atmospheric processors that made dead worlds livable were based on Dracorian designs. Even the communication networks that connected distant worlds were built on foundations laid by the reality shapers. "Your people built the galaxy's basic systems," Mirai realized. "Not built," Buell corrected. "Grew. We did not make machines. We made living systems that could maintain and improve themselves over thousands of years. And those systems are still alive. Sleeping, but alive. And now they are beginning to wake up." Across the galaxy, impossible things began to happen. On worlds where the atmosphere was failing, The air suddenly became cleaner and more breathable. Hyperspace lanes that had been slow and dangerous became smooth and fast. Communication signals that used to take hours to cross space now traveled almost instantly. The Council's own ships found their systems working better than ever before. Their weapons were more accurate, their shields stronger, their engines more efficient, but the same improvements were happening to everyone else's equipment too. The awakening of my people is triggering a larger awakening, Biol explained. The galaxy is remembering what it was like when we worked together to make things better for everyone. Director Vextar was not blind to what was happening. From his flagship, he watched as his carefully controlled systems began operating beyond their designed parameters. His engineers had no explanation for the improvements, but he knew exactly what was causing them. The Dracorian network is reactivating, he told his senior officers. If we do not stop this now, our control over the galaxy will end forever. He gave orders that shocked even his most loyal followers. Use the world killers, he commanded. Start with the human colonies that have been helping the dragons. Destroy them completely. Make it clear that anyone who supports these creatures will face the same fate. Sir, one of his captains protested, those weapons are supposed to be used only against uninhabitable worlds. The colonies have millions of innocent civilians. There are no innocent civilians in this war, Vextar replied coldly. There are only those who support order and those who support chaos. The dragons represent chaos. Therefore, everyone who helps them is an enemy. The captain tried to argue further, but Vextar cut him off. Execute my orders, or you will be executed yourself. Back on the rebel moon, Huan received reports of massive council fleets moving toward human space. Ships carrying weapons that could crack planets and boil away atmospheres. How long do we have? Mirai asked. Days, maybe hours, Huan replied. They are targeting the colonies where you and Buell helped people. Through their mental link, Mirai felt Buell's anguish. He had wanted to heal the galaxy, but instead his awakening had brought war and death. This is not your fault, she told him. This is what the Council has always been. You are just giving them an excuse to show their true nature. But innocent people will die, Biol said. Not if we stop them first. Mirai stood and looked around the room at the rebel leaders. We need to warn the other dragons. All of them. If they work together, maybe they can protect the colonies. Can you reach them? Huan asked. Biol closed his eyes and spread his wings. Power flowed through him and into the awakening network that connected the galaxy. His mental voice called out across impossible distances to his awakening kindred. One by one, they answered. Yuki on Aquatica, Nova on Verdania, Storm on Forge Prime. 4 others whose names were still new and strange. For the first time in 3,000 years, the surviving children of the Dracorian people spoke to each other across the stars. The council comes with death, Biol told them. We must choose. Hide and let innocent people die, or stand together and fight for the future our ancestors dreamed of. The answer came back as one voice from 7 throats. We fight. Across the galaxy, young dragons spread their wings and prepared for war. The network their people had built thousands of years ago hummed with power as ancient systems came fully online for the first time since the genocide. The Council had started this war 3 millennia ago. Now the last Dracorians and their chosen partners would finish it. The capital world of Centralis Prime had never seen such chaos. For 3,000 years it had been the center of galactic government, where representatives from hundreds of species came to make laws and settle disputes. The Great Council chamber rose like a crystal mountain from the planet's surface, its walls transparent so that all beings could see democracy at work. Today, those walls showed something very different. Mirai and Biol materialized in the center of the chamber during the emergency session that Director Vextar had called. The dragon's reality-shaping abilities had carried them through space itself, bypassing every security system the Council possessed. Hundreds of alien representatives gasped and scrambled for cover as Biol spread his magnificent wings. His scales caught the light from Centralis Prime's twin suns and threw it back in dazzling patterns of blue and silver. Members of the Galactic Council, Mirai said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. I am Kim Mirai of Earth. This is Buell, last heir of the Dracorian people. We come to tell you the truth. Director Vextar rose from his seat at the center of the chamber. His gray skin had turned almost white with rage. Seize them, he commanded his guards. These terrorists have brought a bioweapon into our most sacred space. But the guards did not move. They were staring at Buell in wonder rather than fear. The dragon's presence filled the chamber with a sense of peace and ancient wisdom that even the council's trained soldiers could feel. "Listen to what we have to say," Buell spoke, his voice resonating in the minds of every being present. "Judge for yourselves whether we bring weapons or gifts." Through their mental bond, Mirai felt Buell reaching out to the awakened network that spanned the galaxy. Power flowed through ancient pathways that connected every inhabited world. For the first time in 3 millennia, the true history of the Dracorian people would be told to the entire galaxy at once. Images appeared in the air above the council chamber, not holograms or projections, but living memories drawn from the crystal archives on Draconis Prime. Every being in the chamber saw the Dracorians as they had truly been, peaceful cities where dozens of species lived together in harmony. Great libraries where knowledge was shared freely among all who sought it. Gardens that floated in space, growing food for any world that needed it. Hospitals that could heal any injury or disease. "This was what we offered," Buell said as the images played. "Not conquest, but cooperation. Not domination, but abundance for all." The representatives watched in stunned silence as the true story unfolded. They saw Dracorian bonded pairs working with members of every species in the chamber. Humans and Vorthak and Belly and Zephyrins all united in building something beautiful. Then came the darker memories. Secret meetings where early council leaders planned the destruction of the Dracorian civilization. Ships filled with weapons designed specifically to kill reality shapers. The systematic hunting down and murder of every Dracorian they could find. "They told you we were conquerors," Mirai said as the images showed burning cities and fleeing refugees. "They said we were dangerous monsters who wanted to rule the galaxy. But the truth is that we were dangerous to their power, not to your freedom." "Lies!" Vextar shouted, but his voice cracked with desperation. "Ancient propaganda designed to make you sympathize with these creatures." "Then explain this," Buell said. New images appeared. These were not from the ancient archives, but from the present day. Across the galaxy, the awakening Dracorian network was revealing truths that the Council had hidden for millennia. Every hyperspace lane in the galaxy had been created by Dracorian technology. The atmospheric processors that made dead worlds livable were based on Dracorian designs. The food synthesis plants that fed billions were built on Dracorian foundations. "Your entire civilization is built on what my people created," Buell continued. "The Council has been taking credit for our gifts and using them to maintain power over you for 3,000 years. The revelation hit the Council chamber like a physical blow. Representatives who had spent their entire lives believing in the Council's version of history suddenly saw that everything they knew was built on lies. But Vextar was not finished. "Even if this is true," he said, his voice growing stronger, "it does not matter. The Dracorian threat has been contained for 3 millennia. We will not allow it to return now." He activated a hidden communicator in his uniform. "Execute Order 7, he commanded. Across the galaxy, massive council warships began moving toward the worlds where dragons had awakened. Each ship carried planet-killing weapons that could boil away atmospheres and crack worlds in half. Through the network, Mirai and Buell felt the approach of these death fleets. On Aquatica, Dr. Kenji and her dragon Yuki prepared to defend the water world. On Verdania, the elderly farmer Elena stood with her dragon Nova as enemy ships filled the sky. On Forge Prime, the Vorthak mechanic and his dragon Storm gathered workers to fight for their industrial world. "You see," Vextar said with cold satisfaction, "I am prepared to destroy entire worlds rather than allow your kind to spread. Surrender now or watch billions die." Mirai felt despair creep into her heart. Even with their combined power, how could 8 young dragons fight an entire galactic government? How could they protect so many worlds at once? But Buell's mental voice was calm and certain. "We do not fight alone," he said. The dragon reached out through the network to touch not just his awakened kindred, but the ancient systems their people had built throughout the galaxy. For 3,000 years, those systems had been sleeping, providing basic functions but nothing more. Now they remembered their true purpose. On every council warship approaching the dragon worlds, something impossible happened. The ship's own systems turned against their crews. Weapons that had been designed to destroy planets instead began healing the space around them. Engines that should have carried death instead carried messages of peace. The ancient Dracorian network did not just connect planets and communication arrays. It connected every piece of technology that had been built using Dracorian principles, which over 3 millennia had become nearly everything in the galaxy. In the council chamber, representatives watched in amazement as their personal devices began displaying the real history of their worlds. Ships in orbit around Centralis Prime sent down messages of support for the dragons. Even the chamber's own systems began projecting images of what the galaxy could become if the Dracorian gifts were used for their intended purpose. "This is impossible," Vextar whispered, but his words were drowned out by the sound of wonder from hundreds of species. Through the network, the 8 dragons and their partners began to work together as their ancestors had done. Mirai felt her consciousness expand to touch minds across the galaxy. She was simultaneously herself and part of something infinitely larger. Together, they reached out to heal the damage that 3 millennia of council rule had done. Poisoned worlds felt their atmospheres clear. Starving colonies suddenly had abundant food. Species that had been enemies for centuries remembered that they shared the same ancient benefactors, but the greatest miracle was yet to come. Deep in the ruins of Draconis Prime, ancient machines that had been dormant since the genocide began to stir. Powered by the network and guided by the awakened dragons, they began the work of restoration. The dead planet's surface cracked and shifted. Green shoots pushed through the sterile soil. The poisoned atmosphere began to clear. Crystal cities started to grow from the ruins of the old ones, but these were different. They were designed not just for Dracorians, but for any species that wanted to live in peace. "What have you done?" Vextar demanded. "What my people always intended," Biol replied. "We have given the galaxy the choice to build something better." Across the chamber, representatives were standing and applauding. Species that had been under council control for centuries were seeing a vision of true freedom for the first time. The possibility of abundance instead of scarcity, cooperation instead of competition, peace instead of the constant threat of war. But Vextar pulled out a weapon that Mirai recognized from the memory crystals. It was one of the ancient Dracorian killers, designed specifically to destroy reality shapers. "I will not allow this," he snarled, raising the weapon toward Buell. The dragon could have destroyed Vextar with a thought. Instead, he did something that proved the truth of everything he had shown the council. He forgave him. Power flowed from Biol into the weapon, but instead of being destroyed, it was transformed. The device that had been made to kill became something that could heal. The hatred that had driven Vextar for so long was washed away by a tide of compassion that showed him what he could become instead of what he had been. Vextar dropped the transformed weapon and fell to his knees. For the first time in his long life, he understood what the Dracorians had truly offered the galaxy. In that moment of revelation, something fundamental changed in the council chamber and throughout the galaxy. The old system of fear and control began to crumble, not through violence, but through the simple power of beings choosing to build something better together. The bonding of worlds had begun. 1 year had passed since the day Mirai and Biol changed the galaxy forever. The old council chamber on Centralis Prime had been transformed into something beautiful. The cold gray walls were now covered with living crystal that glowed softly with inner light. Representatives from hundreds of species sat not in rigid rows but in comfortable circles where everyone could see and speak to everyone else. Today was special. Today, the symbiotic alliance would officially begin. Mirai stood at the center of the great hall, no longer wearing the patched clothes of a poor salvage pilot. Her new outfit was simple but elegant, woven from materials that seemed to shift color in the light. But the most remarkable change was not in her appearance. It was in her presence. The bond with Buell had transformed her in ways she was still discovering. She could feel the health and happiness of entire worlds through their connection to the awakened network. When she spoke, her words carried the wisdom of both human experience and Dracorian knowledge. Biol stood beside her, no longer the tiny creature that had hatched from an egg in her cramped ship. He was magnificent now, his scales reflecting the colors of nebulae and distant stars. His presence filled the hall with peace and wonder, but they were not alone. Around the chamber stood the other dragons and their bonded partners. Dr. Kenji from Aquatica stood with Yuki, whose scales shimmered like ocean waves. The elderly farmer Elena was there with Nova, whose crystal-like form seemed to contain growing plants and flowers. The Vorthak mechanic stood proudly beside Storm, whose metallic scales hummed with the power of 1,000 factories working in perfect harmony. Each partnership was unique, but all shared the same bond of mutual respect and love that had once made the Dracorian civilization great. "Friends," Mirai began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall without any need for amplification, "we gathered today not to celebrate victory, but to begin the real work." Across the galaxy, the past year had been one of incredible change. The awakening of the Dracorian network had solved many problems that had seemed impossible. Worlds that had been dying from pollution were now clean and green. Species that had fought each other for centuries were working together on projects that benefited everyone. But change was not always easy. "Some of you are afraid," Mirai continued, looking around at the assembled representatives. "You worry that the dragons will become the new rulers of the galaxy. You fear that humanity and the other bonded species will use our partnerships to gain power over you." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. These fears were not unreasonable. For 3,000 years, power in the galaxy had meant the ability to control others. It was hard for many beings to imagine a different way. "That is why we have come here today," Bayul said, his mental voice touching every mind present, "to make a promise that will bind us for all time." Through their bond, Mirai felt Bayul gathering power not just from their connection, but from the entire network that connected the awakened dragons across the galaxy. This would be their greatest act of reality shaping yet. "We, the last children of the Dracorian people, and our chosen partners, make this vow before all the galaxy," Bayul continued. "We will never use our abilities to rule others. We will never force any being to accept our help. We will never claim ownership of worlds or species or resources." As he spoke, the power flowing through the network created visible changes in the air around them. Golden light began to weave itself into complex patterns, forming words and symbols that every species could understand regardless of their language. "Instead," Mirai said, taking up the vow, "we offer ourselves as servants of the galaxy. We will use our gifts to heal what is broken, to create abundance where there is scarcity, to bring peace where there is conflict, but only when we are asked. Only when we are welcomed. And if we ever break this vow," Bayul added, "if we ever try to become rulers instead of helpers, then let the network itself turn against us. Let our own power be taken from us and given to others who will use it more wisely." The golden light solidified into a great tree of crystal and energy that grew up from the floor of the chamber. Its branches reached out to touch every representative present, and through them every world in the galaxy. The Covenant Tree, as it would later be called, would stand as a permanent reminder of the promise made that day. But even as they made their vows, Mirai knew the real work was just beginning. In the months that followed, the galaxy began to reshape itself in ways both large and small. The artificial scarcity that the old council had used to maintain control disappeared as dragon-bonded pairs taught worlds how to provide for themselves. Trade routes that had once been controlled by powerful corporations became open to all. Technologies that had been kept secret were shared freely. Not everyone was happy with these changes. Some of the old council forces, led by beings who had profited from the previous system, tried to fight back, but they found it impossible to wage war when their own weapons refused to work against innocent people, and their ships carried messages of peace instead of threats. Director Vextar, transformed by his encounter with Bayul's forgiveness, had become one of the strongest supporters of the new alliance. He used his knowledge of the old system to help identify and peacefully resolve conflicts before they could grow into larger problems. On her homeworld of Earth, Mirai was welcomed as a hero. But she spent little time there. The bond with Bayul meant they could travel instantly to any world that needed their help. They spent their days healing damaged ecosystems, teaching sustainable technologies, and helping species learn to work together. The other dragon-bonded pairs did the same work on their own worlds and in their own ways. Each partnership brought something unique to the galaxy's healing. The most remarkable change was on Draconis Prime itself. The dead world had become a living symbol of rebirth. The crystal cities that grew from its ruins were home to beings from hundreds of species who came to study and learn. The great libraries that had been destroyed were rebuilt, but this time their knowledge was shared freely with anyone who wanted to learn. Children from across the galaxy came to Draconis Prime to hear the true story of the Dragon Wars. They learned about Kim Mirai, who had spent her last credit on what everyone thought was worthless, and discovered that the most valuable things could not be bought with money. They learned about courage from a human woman who chose to fight for justice even when it seemed impossible. They learned about forgiveness from a dragon who chose mercy over revenge. They learned about the power of partnership from beings who proved that working together could accomplish miracles. But perhaps most importantly, they learned that one person's small act of faith could change the fate of countless worlds. 5 years after that day in the council chamber, Mirai stood once again on the observation deck of her ship. But this was not the old salvage vessel she had once owned. This ship was grown rather than built, shaped by Dracorian reality shaping into a living thing that could travel between stars as easily as a bird flew through air. Bile perched beside her, his great head resting gently on her shoulder. Through their bond, she could feel the contentment of billions of beings across the galaxy. Worlds that had once been dying were now thriving. Species that had been enemies were now friends. The galaxy had learned to dream of abundance instead of scarcity. Do you ever regret it? You'll ask through their mental link. Spending that last credit? Your life would have been simpler if you had kept it. Mirai smiled and reached up to touch the warm scales of her partner's neck. Simple is not always better, she said. Besides, what is one credit compared to the freedom of the galaxy? Through the viewport she could see a dozen worlds, all glowing with the soft light that marked them as part of the symbiotic alliance. Ships from 100 different species moved peacefully between them, carrying trade goods and knowledge and friendship. The best purchases are not measured in credits, she said softly. They are measured in the connections we make and the love we share. Bile rumbled with contentment. My people always knew that, he said. That is why we left our eggs for others to find. We trusted that someday someone would understand. In the distance, another ship was approaching. Mirai could see through the network that it carried a delegation from a newly discovered species who had heard about the alliance and wanted to join. Soon there would be more partners, more bonds, more opportunities to build something beautiful together. The galaxy sang with the voices of countless beings living and working in harmony. And at the center of it all was the simple truth that Mirai had learned in a shabby market stall on New Sol Station. Sometimes the most worthless-looking things contain the greatest treasures. Her last credit had bought her a dragon. But more than that, it had purchased a future where all beings could be free to reach their full potential together. The song of the stars continued, and it would never end.